In 1997, Stargate SG-1 started one of the biggest sci-fi franchises that most people have never heard of. What's it like to watch the pilot in 2024, having only seen the movie? Let's talk about Stargate SG-1.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, can you let the people know what we're going to be discussing today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie or show that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we're talking about the pilot episode of Stargate SG-1, which spun off from the Stargate movie a couple of years earlier and then started a 10-season run back in 1997. So Stargate is one of my favorite franchises of all time. I think it's one of the greatest science fiction franchises ever. It's had something like 20 seasons across 4 spin-offs, and I think it's one of the great unsung heroes of the sci-fi genre. So the two of you have just watched the pilot, having only seen the original movie from 1994. What was your takeaway from Children of the Gods?
Okay, I liked the theme of invasion, extermination, and refuge. Like, I think that was pretty neat. And there were moments, like in the first episode, when the pilot, where I was interested to find out how certain character story plays out, especially the guy and his wife, the wife that got kidnapped, and then the monster went in her stomach.
That's Daniel Jackson, yeah.
They're both there, and I was interested to see how their story would play out. So, all in all, this show, the settings of it was kind of like my type of show. Like, those are the type of shows or movies that I like to watch.
Which is what exactly?
It's like, it felt like, you know, when it had like Alien mixed with the 100 vibes, if that makes sense. So you had like a group of soldiers in a different like world, and then obviously they're up against people from a different planet. So have you seen the 100?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so it had kind of like elements of that in a way, but at the same time it had elements of Star Wars. So it was a mixture of a lot of things. It had like Star Trek, Star Wars, the 100, and Alien all mixed in one. However, after watching the first pilot, I didn't really feel excited enough. Now, I am going to give it the benefit of the doubt because it is the first episode, but it just felt a bit dull. But like I said, there were moments where I was interested, so that's why I'm feeling a bit 50-50 on it.
My thought on Stargate SG-1, I thought it was a kind of good, just like kind of like logical reintroduction to the world. I think it was about maybe 3 years or 3 or 4 years from sort of when the movie first came out. So of course you kind of had to like give people the same feels, or just like reintroduce people to the world, especially when you're sort of swapping out characters and stuff like that. So I think in that sense it did a good job, just kind of like pick things back up as to where it was. It was interesting in the way that they kind of like raised the stakes in terms of, it wasn't this just like kind of like one world to another portal, that there were potentially some other Stargates out there as well that connected to some different planets. So it expanded the possibilities of the universe and expanded how far-reaching some of the Stargates is, and how far-reaching the story could go. Even though we did see the villain or kind of like the bad guys were very similar to obviously the ones that were from the original movie, and maybe it's by design to again just like make people familiar and like get people ease back into the world. I think when we discussed about the movie as well, you kind of alluded to them adding a little bit more depth into the characters. So of course, you had here where you had like kind of Gary O'Neill. They had like that moment when they're reminiscing about the kid on the planet. It did feel very forced about how you like mentioned that. So his son used to do the same thing, because it's something completely random for like a kid to be saluting you, and for your kid to be doing the same thing. But I understand the sentiment that they were trying to kind of like get at in terms of just giving him a little bit more of a sympathetic background this time around, and something to kind of like delve into and like work within this. So for me, it wasn't exciting. Like, it wasn't like the exciting like kind of like big wow a pilot episode, but it was a good way to just kind of be like, oh, okay, this is familiar, and there's greater possibilities and greater threats to be explored in this universe if you come along on the ride.
So this show started in 97, right? When TV was very different. We've touched on a couple of things the movie wanted to do, right? It wanted to connect to the movie. It wanted to continue it. It wanted to set up the plots of multiple seasons of television, right? So one of the first questions I would have is, watching this in 2024, how does it come across? Like there's a lot happening in the episode, right? They go to multiple planets. They bring back a lot of characters and places and ideas from the first movie. Like if you're used to 2020's television, like how did this play to you seeing it for the first time? Because for me it's very nostalgic. I grew up on this stuff, right? Like I was like 12 when this first came out, and when this was on TV, we, like my friends and I would kind of make time in the week to watch the new Stargate episode and stuff like that, right? Like we were all over that. So for me, this is very nostalgic, right? So when I see the Goa'uld designs and the weapons and like the Stargate activating, for me, this is not a nostalgia trip, right? So I'm curious, how does that come across when you're watching this for the first time as an old TV show, essentially?
Like I said, the theme and obviously the setting, I really liked. So like I said, invasion, extermination, and refuge. I really like that type of theme. I like those themes. I like the setting. And I actually found like the storyline was interesting, but like I said, it's just the way that it was executed, it was kind of dull. So that's like the best way I would describe it at times. But there were moments where it piqued my interest. Like I said, mainly
that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? Because storytelling, like TV storytelling, is very different now than it was back then in the 90s, right? Yeah. So what was it that was dull?
Two things. I think one, it was individual performances. Not even individual performances. I just say the performance was one, and another one I think is like what it felt like. Hervey said it was very logical, even though he was saying that's a good thing about it. But for me, it felt like it was made by a scientist, if that makes sense. Do you know what I'm saying? So like it was logical. It made sense. So I feel like the plot's going to be consistent.
I think you kind of like took the word that I was like thinking the whole time that you was kind of going on your spiel, was like that initial hook that sort of the TV shows sort of kind of like normally do have, especially in sort of modern TV shows, where a lot of them have the benefit of the doubt of not having to sort of refamiliarize you with a movie or anything like that sort of come before. Like if you think of like something like The Handmaid's Tale or like Breaking Bad or something like that, where sort of the opening scene or like kind of like the opening is something that's like so kind of like different or so like against like the reality that you sort of know, and it like immediately pulled you into sort of like this mystery or like sort of what's going on in this situation. And I feel like that's where maybe the show was a little bit handicapped, because if I remember correctly, the opening was the sort of kind of like aliens kind of like coming through the portal and kind of like having a shootout with the guards. While that sort of could be deemed exciting, it wasn't something that we hadn't kind of also seen before. I mean, I know it's different for like the aliens to actually come through the portal and actually come to Earth on this side, but it wasn't something completely out of this realm. It wasn't something that, I was like, okay, what's the mystery behind behind this? Which is where the hook wasn't quite there on sort of this opening season for me, anyway.
But I mean, if you've seen the movie, there is a mystery there, right? Because Ra was killed at the end of the movie. And and the movie was pretty clear that there was there were two gates that were connected with each other, and now there's a new villain coming through from somewhere, and it's not clear who he is, and it's not clear where he came from. Like that's the mystery that drives the first episode, right?
I think it hits different because we had the discussion about how weird and wonderful this like thing goes, and like I had the expectation that there would be multiple gates. So maybe if I didn't have that knowledge beforehand. Mm-hmm. It may have been like a bit more of a mystery, but because I knew that, I was a bit like, okay, so like, these people have like come from somewhere else, and they've probably seen or heard like what's happened on this planet to Ra, and maybe coming down to like obviously avenge or like punish or whatever like that. So I think that's probably why it didn't hit me the same in terms of like that level of mystery.
Okay. So do you think, right, it's a thing where, because I'm just thinking from like someone who hasn't seen the movie. So someone that's, let's say, for example, they're just being introduced to the series. Do you think that they would actually get hooked off episode 1? Because it seems like it's a thing where it's heavily reliant on the love of the film. So like it's banking on the audience who love, like it seems like they're banking on the audience who's seen the movie and they love the movie, so they're gonna, they're definitely gonna watch the series. Is that pretty much?
I think no, but to be fair, like to be fair to this, I think they do a good job of.
But it's not bad though.
Yeah, I don't think you have to watch the movie to sort of kind of like get into this. In my opinion, anyways, I feel like it does a good job of like, for someone like Gary O'Neill's character, it's not an actor that you haven't seen before, like a retired sort of a general that's sort of been in the battlefield and like is aware of a situation and is like being drawn back into the field, and then you have like this new captain who's maybe like kind of like pushing against his authority and this that, and the other, and you've got like this sign. I feel like this show does give enough information for you to sort of be able to kind of like go off of.
I think it plays very much like a sequel to the movie, right? Because it basically the events pick up directly, not chronologically directly after the movie, but it like the events follow directly from what happens in the movie, right? The events of the movie set into motion the events of the pilot, and they basically recap the movie very thoroughly, right? Everything that happens in the pilot is in some way grounded in or rooted in the movie, I think. And that was kind of one of my questions was, does it actually stand on its own as a pilot? Because I know what comes after this, and I know who everyone is. I knew who Apophis was and what happens to him and how the characters all develop and where they go in the next seasons and stuff like that, right? So would you say it's too much of a sequel?
No, I wouldn't say it didn't make me curious about the bigger world. I think it definitely, again, like I said, this like multiplanetary stuff and expanding sort of where the Stargates link definitely had me interested. And in terms of it like standing alone as a pilot, sort of away from the movie, for me personally, I feel like it did enough to warrant that you didn't have to watch the movie. Granted, obviously there's like a lot of like exposition or like a lot of explaining as to some kind of like what's come beforehand. But for me, it's you could kind of jump straight into this without really needing that that having watched the previous movie. They kind of recontextualize some of the characters, especially like Gary O'Neill's character.
It's Jack O'Neill, by the way.
Is it Jack O'Neill?
Yeah.
Gary O'Neill, he's a football manager actually, Gary O'Neill. That's always the way. But yeah, no, so they recontextualize like his character a bit in this. They introduced some of the new characters, which again weren't in the previous movie, so that kind of helps in terms of that aspect as well. I think it's more Daniel where you maybe needed to have seen the movie, just kind of like understand his deal and sort of like what was going on with him and like why he decided to stay behind and this and the other. But at the same time, if you hadn't watched it, there would be this curiosity as to, you went on this mission and this person helped you kind of get across, but chose to stay behind. So like, what's the mystery behind this person?
So I find this kind of interesting because in preparation for this, I read up on some of the initial reactions towards the pilot. And it was aggressively mixed, right? A lot of people just were not impressed. They did not think this had any legs. They did not think this was anything special. And it sounds to me like if you have not seen the next 10 seasons and you're just looking at the pilot, it looks to me like you kind of had a similar reaction to it, right?
But were the critics were they referencing the movie?
Well, some of them, but a lot of the time they basically said, well, this is just standard sci-fi fare. It's a lot of gunfights. It's a lot of cheesy props in hallways. It doesn't have the grandeur of the movie and stuff like that, right? So those were basically kind of a lot of the opinions that existed about this, and it didn't really stop them. They just kept going and they found their audience, right? But if we call this, say, a not very strong pilot, I think it's great, but it's mostly because it lays the foundation for things I know that come later, right? But most shows don't make it to 10 seasons, right? And don't have, and many that do kind of have plot, like run out of plot after maybe 6 years or something like that. And Stargate didn't do that, right? It just kept going until the very end. And it kept reinventing itself and kept expanding its premise and its world. I think that's one of the remarkable things about this, is that it starts off with a very simple idea. What if the gods of ancient Egypt were actually aliens? And it kind of just keeps running with that, and that doesn't stop, and it just keeps going. Is that surprising? Is that they like watching this? Did you see how can they stretch this to 10 seasons, or do you see the potential, or what?
So yes and no, because like in this, they're kind of retreading some of the stuff that happened in the movies in terms of they're looking at the ancient Egyptian gods again in this. They kind of gone back to the same planet that they had in the first movie as well, but at the same time that they've opened up some of the possibilities of more, like there being more out there and like kind of like more to explore. So it running to 10 seasons, probably a little bit surprising. Like, having just watched the pilot, obviously I know a little bit more in terms of, how you described how crazy it gets, and people going to heaven and being kicked out of heaven multiple times. You know, it seems to get like pretty wacky with its ideas, which is good. But you know, if I had like just the mindset of like, you know, I just watched the pilot and I just watched the movie, I wouldn't have seen them stretching it to like, you know, 10 plus seasons and, you know, going on that long run, because it seems like the idea and like the scope of it was sort of pretty set and pretty limited. And, you know, I couldn't see how they could like evolve and keep expanding it from season to season to like keep viewers engaged. So yeah, I would say that I'm surprised.
I think is depending on two things. The first one is how big, obviously it's dependent on how big the film was in its time. Also another is what the genre was like during its time in terms of its reception. So at a high. So like, I don't know, when did Star Wars came out years before, but was there like a Star Wars movie or another sci-fi movie like Star Trek or something that came out roughly around the same time? Or was there like in the 90s, what was the sci-fi genre like in the 90s? Was it big?
So Star Trek The Next Generation was, I don't know if it was still running in 1997. I think it might have just finished. We're 2 years away from the Star Wars prequels, which came out in 99. On TV, science fiction was a lot like alien invasions and conspiracies and things like that. The X-Files might have still been running in 97, I'm not sure. So there was a lot of science fiction on TV at the time. I think one of the things that set Stargate apart is that it's modern day people in sci-fi environments, basically. And that is unusual. Like normally it's set in the future, or like there's us essentially, right? The humans from Earth are more advanced usually in these shows than we are, right? And these, I think one of the things that's really appealing about Stargate to me is that this is us, right? This is contemporary people. They have, at least initially, have all the technology that we have, right? That the real world militaries and governments have. So it mixes this strange realism between like the mythological part and then the sci-fi part, but then it's also very grounded because these are just people from modern day Earth. And then it does get, in a few weeks, if we do the Stargate Atlantis pilot, then we'll see what that looks like after 8 seasons. But initially it starts out very grounded, right? In this pilot, much like in the movie, it's just guys with rifles going to another planet. And I think that sets us apart from something like Star Trek, which is very, very much in the future and very like humanity at its best, right? Or Star Wars, which is very far removed from reality, right? Like in terms of who the characters are and the planets and the technology and everything, it's all very out there, right? And Stargate kind of sits in the middle where it's very grounded at its core, but it puts you into these weird situations where you're fighting like alien god emperors and so on.
Yeah, and I can see the appeal to that. But I just think the environment and the times that it was in, and if the movie was big, then I do think obviously those played a big part into why there was 10 seasons. Not all the time though, because there are like movies where they'll end up creating a season and it would end up failing. So I'm not trying to say that happens all the time, but with this one, I think it might have been a thing where, I could be wrong, but it might be a thing where the movie was so big that it created such a big fandom that they pretty much moved onto the sea. You know, they were pretty much on board with the series. And like you said, it did some interesting stuff. So it made it more relatable for the viewer. You said it was more grounded. So I do understand that. And I do see that as well. Especially there was like a scene where one of the soldiers on the other side of the Egyptian gods, when he saw the watch, he was like, "What is that?" And then the guy was like, "You remember the scene?" He was like, "It's a watch." And I was like, "Oh, okay." That felt, to us, it was like, yeah, just a watch. Well, to them, it was like very extraterrestrial. So they kind of like blended.
Well, specifically in that context, he realized that person should not have something as advanced as our modern watch.
Yeah.
But to answer your original question, I think one of the things that's really kind of weird about Stargate is that the movie itself was quite successful. It made $200 million on a $55 million budget, I think. So a solid success, but it never really got the kind of cultural awareness that other sci-fi has, right? Like I don't think there's anything that like the average person knows about Stargate, right? Like even the gate itself, or like any of the iconography or the villains or anything like that is not recognizable, right? To people who are not into it. But then it got its spin-off, which then ran for 10 seasons and found its niche and its audience and was able to not completely conclude its story, but it got very far, right? So it's got this weird mix of success and obscurity where in some ways it's exceptionally successful, and in other ways, nobody's heard of it, right? So that's, and I think that also has to do with like the environment in like the late 90s, early 2000s, where there was a lot of science fiction on TV, and Stargate kind of got drowned out a little bit, but it kind of found a large enough audience that it was allowed to keep going, which I think would not happen today. I think today it would be canceled after 2 seasons because it failed to be this massive success, right? But yeah, back then, if it found a niche on some cable channel somewhere, I think it ended up in the Sci-Fi Channel relatively quickly, and then kind of kept going for a long time.
I think it didn't receive its cultural awareness because people were thinking it was like another Star Wars, Star Trek knockoff. Because
I don't know what people think about it. Like, I think it's pretty distinctive because I don't know, maybe the premise seems too silly if you look at it from the outside. And it was kind of one of the reasons why I want to discuss this, is like, does it actually come across like to me, it's one of the greatest science fiction stories on TV, right? I think it's better science fiction than Star Trek in many ways, because it's actually quite smart about what it does, right? So because what it actually kind of is a story of Earth becoming a galactic superpower and taking on these alien forces. At one point, they build a spaceship and they call it the Prometheus, right? Like Prometheus in Greek mythology stole fire from the gods, right? And so the spaceship with which they fight the space gods is called the Prometheus, right? So it's like it's got that kind of sensibility, and it's this journey of Earth kind of becoming like the superpower. So in the early seasons, they are very weak, right? Like the Goa'uld, like Ra's people, are much more powerful than us. And the starting point of the series is essentially we need to go out into the galaxy to find technologies, find resources, make allies, and fight the Goa'uld. Otherwise, they will come to us, right? And by the end of the show, the Goa'uld are completely defeated, and we are the superpower, right? So there's this slow trajectory in between where we kind of go from the entire, like from the very bottom of the ladder to the very top of the ladder over the course of all these different seasons. And I think it's very remarkable that a show was able to do this, like that it was able to change the status quo in these ways and just able to tell its story in these ways. And if you just watch it like from start to finish, you're not really seeing like any disruptions to that, right? It just builds logically on each other one step at a time. And I think for a show to be able to do this for 10 seasons is pretty remarkable. But it's doing that without really like resonating with a large number of people. So it's this weird contradiction, I think, where it's kind of simultaneously got to do everything it wanted, but on the other hand, never really making it in that sense.
That is interesting, because I'm thinking maybe people are just loyal to their star shows. So some people are just, because I feel like some people can be like that. Like they feel like they're cheating their show if they go onto it. I don't know if that's what the culture was like, but obviously there was Star Trek, Star Wars, now there was Stargate. I'm guessing Stargate was the latest one, right? As in, like,
that's the newest one of those, yeah. And it's actually funny because this is like this traditional rivalry between Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans. Right, like I think that's the average, like that's what a lot of people know, right? Those are the two big science fiction franchises, and like you have to pick one or the other. You have to pick a team, right?
Yeah.
It's like Apple versus PC and
like
Burger King versus McDonald's, and like these two big names, right? That kind of have the market cornered, right? But then there's also like nobody picks Stargate in that fight, right? For some reason, people are just not aware of it, and I don't know if it's because it simply flies under everybody's radar, or if it's because it just looks like hokey nonsense to people, and so they don't give it the time of day. I don't know. Do you feel like you're watching like a Star Trek knockoff or something when you're watching?
No, I definitely saw influences, but I didn't think like it was a knockoff. Cause I think, like you said, it felt very the difference between this show, like you say before, the difference between this show and other shows. They felt, like you said, very grounded, and it felt like, I remember there was a scene, right, when they were coming through the portal, and then one of the soldiers brought someone from that planet, and then she shouted like, "Don't shoot, it's a refugee." I was like, oh shit, he's actually a refugee, but it's a refugee from a different planet. So it felt very like, it was just like, it felt very like entwined with reality. So yeah, so I think
it's the real world military, right? They work by the same rules, at least initially, as any other modern day military, right? And these are refugees that caught up in a military mission, right? And that had to be rescued.
And I can see
how this is in a way like very real.
And I can see how that would have been its selling point? Was it its selling point when it was obviously marketed, advertised?
So one thing about the show is that they worked very closely together with the Air Force. This bunker complex where the gate is, that is essentially, it's a central command of the nuclear defense or something like that. And it's the Cheyenne Mountain complex. Not sure how, if it's still in use or what exactly is there, but it's a real place, right? And they basically, they weren't sponsored by the Air Force, but they had like consultants and that sort of thing. And in exchange for positive portrayal of the Air Force and of the military, they got access to a lot of props and details and advice, so that it all feels very real. So the uniforms, how people speak, the ranks, the details, like how things are done. Again, from everything I've read, that is very authentic. That is one way in which they make it more real. And also, I think the scientist characters, and it's like a lot of characters in Stargate are scientists of some description. Like Daniel Jackson is an archaeologist, Samantha Carter is an astrophysicist, and then there are others introduced later on in the series. We get to see some in Atlantis as well. And they talk and behave pretty much like real scientists. Like I did science at university. I spent several years hanging around scientists. And as far as TV shows go, this might be the most authentic portrayal of scientists I've seen. Just how people talk, how they work. Like a lot of it is like super science, right? But a lot of it comes down to like showing the trial and error in working things out, and things go wrong, and then you analyze it, and then you try again, and then it works better. Like how real science is done, that drives a lot of plots of Stargate, right? And even though you have people like working with these fantastical, like there's teleporters and wormhole generators and plasma weapons, everything, but it still manages to make it feel like this is like, if this was real, this is how it would be. Right? Like whether that actually holds up in the exact details is another question. But in terms of how it feels, they manage throughout the entire series, manage to make it feel very real. And I think to me, that was one of the things that actually is part of the core appeal. And like that is not true for something like Star Trek, for instance. Like Star Trek scientists don't behave like real scientists, for instance. But like I don't know how much of an appeal that is for most people. But for me, especially like I was watching like especially Stargate Atlantis while I was like in university writing my lab reports for physics, like for my physics class and stuff like that, right? It felt more authentic than anything else in science fiction, especially TV, especially at the time. So for me, that is one of the things that's made it special, but I don't know how much that resonates with most people. Apparently it doesn't, otherwise this would have been a bigger success.
Like I can understand how it connects with you. I'm just trying to think like what else from the show, what's its selling point, or what from the show, is there anything else from the show that it could connect with like just the average viewer that's, you know, that hasn't been around scientists or doesn't really know much about the military? And like I mentioned the themes, which I thought were great, which I thought were good. So I think for me, so I don't even know much about scientists, I don't know much about the military, but the themes which I mentioned, what I got out from it, I said, okay, you know what, it connected with me in moments, right? So I think for people, maybe it's a thing where it connected with them with like, you know, for moments, but maybe they might have saw it as like a Star Trek, Star Wars knockoff, especially with certain scenes, like for example, when they're shooting the little laser things, and you know what I'm saying? So there might be certain scenes
like weapons, yeah.
Exactly. So maybe it was the reason why they never connected with so much in comparison to, you know, maybe the reason why they didn't, you know, connect with this in comparison to like Star Wars and Star Trek is because you know, they just saw it as a knockoff. But it's not a knockoff. I can confirm that. That's why I asked like how did they advertise it? Because if they advertise it as in like, you know, the way that you pretty much just explained it, in terms of like it's very grounded and, you know, like it's realism mixed with the whole science fiction. If they advertise it like that, then I think it should have been bigger, especially knowing that obviously back in the 90s sci-fi was big.
Yeah, essentially like the big theme of Stargate is essentially what do you do when you have power over somebody else, and like if you are stronger in some way, what are the consequences of that in terms of how you relate to other people, right? So the Goa'uld are more powerful than us, and so they think they deserve to rule us, and they are like parasites that live off us essentially. And the Asgard, which we meet, these are like Thor and his people, are another advanced alien species. And their answer to that question is it gives them the responsibility to protect us like children. So they will protect us from the Goa'uld, but they will not treat us as equals because they think we will get there in 1,000 years or whatever. And then we will be partners. But until now we are treated like children, right? And so every major faction in this show kind of has a different answer to that question of, if you are stronger than somebody else, how should you relate to them? And Earth's answer is essentially, it gives us the obligation to help people and help them catch up with us in a way, and be partners as much as possible. So for example, there's an episode, so relatively early on in the show, a species called the Unas are discovered, and they're essentially the first hosts of the Goa world. They evolved on the same planet as these parasites, and they're like these lizard people, and they are not very technological, but they are intelligent. And it is discovered that a lot of Unas live on our planet directly on top of like this resource that we need to fight the Goa world, right? And so there are these different responses to how should we deal with them. Some people say we should negotiate with them. Others say, well, we're stronger than we, so we can just displace them somewhere else, and then we can set up our mines, and that will allow us to protect Earth because of the resources we get from that location. And the episode essentially involves Daniel Jackson being kidnapped by one of them or taken hostage, and he gradually learns his language, and he then eventually brokers a deal where they mine this mineral and sell it to us, but in a way that respects their spiritual traditions, because that area has spiritual significance to them. So it kind of manages to kind of create an equal partnership where everybody gets what they want by kind of building a dialogue, right? So that is kind of like Stargate in a microcosm, where there are these massive power differentials, right? Where most civilizations are either much more powerful than us or much weaker than us. And then there's this question of, okay, how should we relate to other people? And different characters have different answers. And I think those answers are really what drives the story. And I think that is very different from any other sci-fi franchise that's out there. And it's also much more relatable to the real world, right? That is a question that every country in the world has to answer in some way, right? And Stargate takes that on directly. And because we start off near the bottom of the hierarchy and end up near the top, we kind of see it from every perspective. Like about halfway into the show, there's like this episode where Earth needs a resource from somebody who's like embroiled in this world war, and we can give them a resource that allows them to power their super weapons in exchange for something that we need. I think they have the cure for cancer or something like that, something really valuable. But we realize that they're the bad guys. They're essentially the Nazis in that world war. And now the question becomes, how much are our morals worth, for instance? And in that episode, the Stargate Command makes the decision to not give the technology to these people because of what they would do with it. But that is exactly what the aliens did in the first season towards Earth. They would say, no, you're not ready for this technology. And if you get wiped out by the Goa world because you're not strong enough, that's too bad. But we are too evolved to give you this weapon that you're not ready for. And so they flipped the script after a couple of seasons where Earth is suddenly now in this position of power. So there are all these different things going on in Stargate that I think are really cool and that no other science fiction franchise has really done in that way. But you have to kind of watch 5 seasons to get to it. Is the problem.
Seems like, okay, so Earth are like the good guys. So could you argue that that's not really like a true reflection? Of course, it's not going to be a true reflection of actually how the world is. But because obviously, like, what I'm trying to get at is a lot of countries, for example, like people are like, a lot of countries are very like built off imperialism, right? Mm-hmm. So is there any of that throughout? Like, are people from Earth always going to be the good guys in this series?
They actually early on in the show, there is a splinter faction in the US government that thinks we should just take what we need. So like there's an episode in which a planet has an alien artifact that allows them to regulate the weather, which is obviously very powerful. And so SG-1 goes to that planet, kind of reports back, and then they come back a month later, and they are essentially hated because they are accused of having stolen this artifact, which they know nothing about, right? And then it turns out, after some investigation, it turns out that there is another SG team that went back to that planet and stole the artifact. And so the plot is about 2 factions within Stargate Command fighting each other about how to deal with essentially indigenous cultures.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's one episode. And there are others like this. And like the thing about the Unas and the mineral deposit, right? That's similar, right? If another weaker country sits on an important resource, there are going to be people who say we should just take it, right? And people will get over it or something, right? And there are others who say, no, we should negotiate for it fairly, right? And so on, right? So one thing that's really realistic about Stargate is that it's not all good or bad. Like there are like different perspectives and there are trade-offs. and sometimes your morals come with a cost, and sometimes that cost is too high, and sometimes it isn't, and it attempts to be quite nuanced about this. And also about every 4 seasons, they have a different president, and each president has a different attitude towards the Stargate program. Some of them think it's a waste of time, and we should just shut down the gate and hide from the aliens. And others say, no, this is the most important thing we've ever done, and we need to double down. And like, that's also realistic, right? Because if you're in, like, if you're in the military, your mission changes every couple of years, depending on who's in government, right? So it is not as simple as we are the good guys. It's we are the good guys if we try. And not everybody tries, and not everybody has the same idea of what good is. And a lot of the villains are like, there's actually an arc, like a season-long arc, where like Stargate Command gets audited. And there's this guy who thinks the Stargate is like this massive resource waste, and he's kind of this obstructive bureaucrat, but he's actually just trying to do his job, and he's actually well-intentioned. He actually thinks like this money could be used for better things. And like, it's not as simple as good guy, bad guy, right? So there are a lot of nuances to this. So I think, like, in that sense, it's the most realistic sci-fi franchise.
You know what? If this might actually be, hopefully it's not an sort of question, but it feels like, do you think that this show is for smart people? And the reason why it wasn't, it didn't have a massive appeal is because obviously not a lot of people are smart, so they don't know what the hell is actually going on. Not what's going on. Right. Sorry, not what's going on, but they're not like, for example, the stuff that Daniel, you revealed, like, they're not like, there's a lot of allegories, right? So I think they're not aware of that.
To me, like how Daniel's kind of like described all of that, is it seems like they at no point, in any of the seasons abandoned story, and they're always kind of like looking at things logically, and they're like putting character and story at the forefront of like a lot of what they're doing. And I don't feel like that makes it for smart people. I feel like that's just kind of good storytelling, and if you're gonna go for 10 seasons, you need to keep people engaged. You need to sort of like think about things like, how does the new president kind of like interact with the Stargate program and things like that. It just makes it more interesting. It puts a spin on it. It throws new dilemmas and new conflicts into the situation for some of the existing characters to tackle. So I feel like, from what everything Daniel's explained there, is it just seems like it's constantly thinking about, how the world reacts to this, and then how the characters react to the situations that they're in. And way back when, sort of earlier in this review, when you were kind of like saying that it ran for 10 seasons, and like Earth went from being one of the lower powers to one of like the high powers, like one of the questions I was thinking about at that time was like, how does like that power corrupt, and like how does that power influence the people? Because it's all good to when you're at the bottom and you're having to like do deals and this, that, and the other, and you're at the mercy of others. But then when you eventually become the top dogs, and you've been on this journey for many years, I can imagine in the universe it spans for many years. People come, people go, people have new ideas, this, that, and the other. It's just like, how does all of that then corrupt when you're at the top? So I think it seems like that's what the show does really well, and it seems like that's probably why it ran for as long as it did, because it kept things fresh, and it kept things interesting, and it kept it kept the characters honest. It kept the characters kind of like continuously facing new conflicts. It seems. I mean, the way that Daniel described it, it sounds like it's one of the most kind of like well thought out and well like developed shows, because you see in so many shows at the moment, a lot of studios are like trigger happy with canceling shows and canceling series, but there are many examples of seasons that have run their course, or like have gone on for too long, and they kind of like run out of ideas, or they kind of misunderstand what made the show great in the first place, and then you have like characters that you thought were one way, and they start completely changing who they are as a character, and none of it really makes sense, or none of it really is driven by kind of like what's been going on in the world and stuff like that. So yeah, I think like as Daniel's explained it, I understand it more why it's run for 10 seasons.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Like it really does. So first of all, the thing about is Stargate for smart people. I think it's a smart show, but I think it makes these things very accessible, right? So a lot of episodes play out like pretty standard sci-fi. There are like 200 plus episodes just in SG-1, right? So not all of them are going to be A+ material, right? But there's a lot of episodes where they like bring back an alien technology and it gets out of hand and they kind of figure it out, right? You could tell the same story in just about any sci-fi franchise probably. But one of the things that it does really well is that it does not simply designate us as the good guys, right? It makes us earn it. So generally, Stargate Command is the good guys, right? But that's because we've earned it, because we've been challenged along the way and we made the right choices, so we made mistakes and then we realized them and we fixed them. So I think it does not feel like a foregone conclusion that the protagonists are the good guys. It's they try to be and they make mistakes and then they fix them and then they get challenged and so on, right? Like they're like, and I've named a couple of different examples, right? And I think that is actually something that a lot of fiction in general, not just science fiction, but fiction kind of forgets, is that like it's like it kind of just designates people as good guys or bad guys. But like there are episodes where we collaborate with Goa'uld for strategic reasons. And like a couple of seasons in, they introduce a faction of Goa'uld that are not imperialists, that are fighting an insurgency against other Goa'uld. And then we work together with them, but they still view us as inferior. And there's this tension going on, like just how equal our partnership with them is and so on, right? So they're always throwing wrenches into the works, and then we send in the heroes to pull out the wrenches. And because of that, our goodness in that sense feels earned. It's not just because the script says so, but it's because we earned it, and us earning that was the whole point, right? So when like the Asgard go extinct at the end of the show and they give us all their super technology, it feels earned. Like we understand why they trust us with this knowledge, right? Like even though in the beginning they treated us like children. So it's stuff like that. I think that's really compelling to me, and that really got me into these stories and these characters. Any other like we could talk about this for 5 hours. Like we've not even talked about like the Ori, which were these evolved energy beings who essentially created space Christianity to enslave galaxies, and then we fight them in their holy spaceships. That also happens. Like we could talk about that, and that's one of my favorite parts of the show. I think that's where it really drives the themes home. And a lot of fans didn't really like it because they liked the antiquity and the Egyptian gods and the pyramid-shaped spaceships and all of that, right? But I think that part really works. So we've barely scratched the surface of what Stargate has, but we're running out of time. So any other questions or remarks about Stargate?
For anyone that wants a full deep dive on Stargate, because I know Daniel can probably talk about this for another 12 hours or so. So let us know in the comments if Daniel should just have like a full video of just kind of going through Stargate SG-1 and also like the key moments and all the sort of like the key points throughout all the seasons, because it sounds fascinating, and like it seems like daunting to try and tackle 10 seasons of a show that came out in like 1997. Obviously, like it ran sort of for multiple years past that. So, you know, possibly like a good recap of sort of everything that happened would be an interesting thing. But yeah, I mean, as a whole, like genuinely, it's like Stargate does sound like very interesting. So it sounds very interesting. It sounds like it would be like right up my street, but it's just like there's like certain blockers that I have on it. One, it's dated, and two, well, I say it's dated. I mean, it's an older show, and two, just like the mammoth of a task of like kind of trying to get through 10 seasons. It seems a bit of a tall task for me, but you know, everything like, you know, having discovered Stargate and like sort of kind of like everything about it, it seems like a great show. And you know, anyone that has time, you know, anyone that's like, if I was at uni, I probably would have devoured 10 seasons of Stargate, but unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of that amount of time anymore. But you know, for anyone that does have that time, you know, it sounds like something, you know, well worth exploring and well worth looking into.
And like I said, I'm 50-50 on this show. It's a thing where I might have to give it a chance. And Daniel, just last question. If I do give it a chance, is there like a specific episode where it gets good? Like, even though you feel like it gets good from episode 1, but for me, where do you think?
How many episodes are there in the season as well?
So this is old school television with like, so it's 214 episodes across 10 seasons, each one like 42 minutes. So it is quite a bit.
Is there a specific season where it's like
so
notable for everyone?
There are best episodes. It's kind of the problem because it builds on each other, right? So a lot of it is payoff for stuff that came earlier, not in a strict continuity sense, but just in terms of paying off ideas that were introduced earlier. But if you're interested, I would watch the finale of the first season, because that is essentially where it gets serious, essentially, right? So I think like most there are a few episodes. Notably, I think the third episode is the one where they go to the space Mongols, and it's the one like that one is pretty clumsy and not great. Like it's like, you remember that reproductive organ speech that Carter gives in the pilot, where she gets like a frosty reception from O'Neill, and she says, "Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I can't do the job." It's basically 40 minutes of that. But if you are kind of curious about it, I would watch the finale of the first season, because that is where it gets real.
So I think it's just one of those ones where I might have just give it a chance, because like I said, there were moments and I'm intrigued in certain stories. So I'll say I'm going to contemplate it. I'll see. But I'm more leaning into giving it a couple of chances. So I'd say like 4 episodes. If I watch 4 episodes and then I still can't get into it, then it might have to be a no for me. But I'd say 4 episodes, 5 episodes max. So yeah, I'm just trying to figure out which episodes.
I mean, no TV show is for everybody, right?
No.
It's just, if you thought this had a bit of a hokey premise, or it looked a bit dated, or if you like science fiction and if you like those ideas we've been talking about, this is one of the greats, in my opinion.
It looks like we've come to an end. Thank you very much for tuning into today's semi-discussion, semi-debate, you know what I'm saying? But Hervé?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts down below. And of course, if you liked what we did today, if you liked our discussion today, tell a friend. And if you hated what we discussed and how we discussed, then tell an enemy and let them burn a little bit.
All right, guys. Well, we'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.